Well, I think that I am an introvert. I am someone who is also, I suppose, curious about things happening around me in the world. I like reading as an academic. My favorites are actually Native American histories and biographies. I used to play badminton very seriously, competitively. I play football. I'm quite a crazy football fan. I'm a hardcore Manchester United fan since 1976. My favorite player ever in Manchester United is this guy called Frank Stapleton, who was a striker in the early 80s. When I started my undergraduate education in University of Wisconsin-Madison, I was interested in journalism then. But for my electives, I ended up taking 2 courses. One was on political socialization, and the second course that I took around the same time was on nuclear deterrence and nuclear politics by this old American professor. His name was David Tarr. He was actually in the US military, posted in West Berlin during the Cold War. So quite literally staring down the adversary. Right? Those 2 courses, I think, really left a very strong impression in me, and right after that I decided to shift my major from journalism to international politics. I think it was early 2016, if I remember correctly. Of course, it was very exciting for me. Never had this experience before. It was with the House Committee on Homeland Security, and this was that period where the fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq was really sort of at its peak, I suppose. A few sort of objectives I had, right? First and foremost is to use the opportunity to emphasize the importance of Southeast Asia in the sort of larger strategic thinking of the United States. Second is to highlight the fact that at that time, indeed, terrorism was a security threat to some countries in the region, but and thirdly, to draw out the nuances of that, because it's not a case where it was so straightforward, right? I picked up Malay from school time because I was very active playing football. So you end up being in the team, shouting, talking tactics in Malay. When I first started at IDSS, Institute of Defence and Strategic Studies, and S.R. Nathan was the director then, he hired me. He asked me what my interests were. I said Indonesia and Malaysia. Then he asked me, can you speak Malay? Can you read the Utusan Malaysia? I said, at that point I probably couldn't read. And he said, okay, we need to fix that. And so he made me pack up, get on a plane, spend 3 to 4 months in Malaysia to study intensive Malay. So it was like 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3.5, 4 months. Arabic is just out of interest because I was working on Muslim movements and political parties in Malaysia, in Indonesia. Well, first and foremost, I'm very honored to be invited to take on this fellowship named after him. I had the great privilege of working for him, I think 2 years before he went to the Istana. He's a very tough boss, very high expectations and all that. But I was a young researcher, just fresh out of university, first degree holder. He was very nurturing. The first one will cover sort of the big picture, right? Which is the China-US relationship. I think it's important for us to take a step or two back to try to get a sense of how they arrived at this situation. we keep talking about choice, and it's a bit tiresome really. So I'm hoping not to talk about choice, but really to talk about how Singapore, even as a small country, can get ahead of the competition between the two great powers. The second one, sort of bringing it closer back home to talk about the region, and the region in the context of changing global geopolitical environment. For us, as Singapore and as a member of ASEAN, as a country in Southeast Asia, how do we navigate the challenges that arise from this shifting landscape? And the final lecture sort of brings it a bit closer to home, really looking at this theme of diversity and pluralism of Southeast Asia, but at the same time, the kind of vectors of polarization that emerge out of that, right? Whether ethnic politics, religious identity and the like. And tying that back to the larger theme, again, of my 3 lectures, which is really how Singapore and the region can navigate all these challenges. As an educator, I have always stressed the point that Singapore and Singaporeans really need to foster a better understanding of our neighbourhood, especially for younger Singaporeans, to understand the value of having a good sense of the region that we live in.